Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thanks for liking our channel and for subscribing to it and reminding yourself to watch it by clicking on that bell icon.
And in case you're new to the show here, what we're going to be doing is having a conversation, Todd and I, centered around the lectionary, the gospel lectionary reading for the upcoming weekend. And we're going to hopefully have this conversation in the context of love, in the context of justice, in the context of inclusion, societal justice specifically. And our hope is that our talking will be just talking in the sense of justice, but we also hope that something that we say during this conversation about the lectionary reading, that it'll inspire you. Something will catch, some light will go off, and it'll inspire you to do more than just talking this week.
So today our lectionary reading for the week comes from John chapter 14. And one of the potent passages of John where you really start to see some of his connecting of Jesus to God, and specifically in this passage, referring to God as Father and the Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. And so we want to get into that discussion today and about some of the characteristics and concepts that we see there. So Herb, why don't you start us off?
Sure. If any of you have been watching the recent episodes where we're in the Gospel of John, you'll notice right out of the gate this week when it says, uh, I've told you where I'm going, prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you, and I'll come back, take you with me, that where I am, you'll be also. And then Jesus says, the Johannine Jesus says, you know the way to the place where I'm going. Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That whole before we get into the next sentence, that whole interchange there of Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life, and him going away, and them already knowing the way, and all of this talk about the way, that is a very proto-Gnostic Johannine conversation. All
Mm-hmm.
of that rhetoric just has that
Mm-hmm.
flavor. I think it's also funny. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I've been a Star Wars fan since the late 70s. I'm a child of the 80s, and I grew up on Star Wars. Is probably the most formidable narrative that I grew up with as a kid. And it's May the 4th. It's Star Wars Day. We're doing this show, and Jesus is claiming here to be the way, and I can't help but hear the Mandalorians in my head every time we read this week. So I want to know tonight, what is the Johannine community, what do they mean when they say, this
Mm-hmm.
is the way, or Jesus is the way, or when Jesus says I am the way? And then that next phrase, that's the one that's problematic, and maybe we could start with that one. No one comes to the Father
Mm-hmm.
except through
Yeah.
me. I'm the way, not just the way, I'm the only way.
Yeah.
What are your
Well,
thoughts
and
on that, Todd?
yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, you are looking at just, I mean, I think we're coming to the heart and soul, the real meat of this proto-Gnostic approach to the person of Jesus. I think we are seeing John say this. This is the thing. You say the name Jesus. You confess belief in Jesus. You take every action and word of Jesus and you make it almost sacramental to yourself. That from what you told me about the Mandalorian is that, whenever something is said of the word of Jesus is said, it's yes, this is the way. It's like
Right. That would have been a Mandalorian Jesus. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's very much a mental assent that it's almost not so much paying attention to what Jesus did or paying attention to what Jesus said. It's that Jesus said it. It's that Jesus did it. And
Mm.
therefore, Jesus sanctifies everything because Jesus comes from the Father and therefore brings the holiness of the Father into everything that he does. It really doesn't matter what he did, it's that he did it. And so your faith, your eternal salvation lies in then, in a sense, regurgitating the facts of Jesus' life, the stories of Jesus' life, the teachings of Jesus' life back as this is the way. This is the way.
Mm.
It's not a command to action. It's not a command to living in the world here and now in a certain way. It is claiming this as truth because this is the secret
Yeah.
passage. This is the way.
Right.
This is how you get there. This is how you get to that post life altered consciousness out of body experience.
Yeah. The in the synoptic gospels, the phrase "this is the way" or "I'm the way, the truth, and the life," Jesus saying I'm the way, and in the book of Acts, I mean, that language is used. I mean, the early Christians, there's some evidence there
Mm-hmm.
that they were referred to first as people of the way.
Right.
um
Right.
but in those synoptics, that is a set of ethics whereby we're making the world a safer, more compassionate, more just home
Mm-hmm.
for everybody. When we get to John, it's a very different use. It's a very different context. This is now the way, yes, to the afterlife bliss, whatever, but it's also the way to gnosis, the way to the
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. And it's that knowledge that ushers us into life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why Jesus is saying you already know. It's all about knowing,
Mm-hmm.
and very little, like you just said, about doing or following.
Right. Yeah. I think it's the difference between being a Facebook poster and an actual activist. I think that you can be a woke Facebook person and post all the right things about what the world should look like, but if you're not actually out there on the ground in your neighborhood and your community actually trying to create that better place, then that's like the difference between a John Johannine
Mm.
Gnostic gospel of Facebook theology versus a synoptics on the ground actually doing the work theology. And I think the difference between the two comes out in passages like this, because you see the disciples in John wrestling with the gnosis.
Mm-hmm.
That's how John has it set up, and you see that in the confusion with Thomas and Philip saying, "Well, yeah, you're saying this, but how do we actually know?" And
Mm-hmm.
they're wrestling with trying to figure out how to know, and then this conversation continues on into John 15 and like that. But
Not how
in
to do, but how to
not how to
know.
do, it's how to know. It's the whole conversation about having the right thoughts.
Yeah, which I mean, for those who are unfamiliar with the concept or the language, Gnostics, the word gnosis means knowledge. That was their focus, gaining that secret knowledge. So, what about this? No one comes to the Father except through me. Only Jesus.
And I think this goes to the conversations we've had in previous weeks where John is really making the push to say that everybody else, any other religious teacher out there in the ether, can't be trusted. It is basically saying it is Jesus or else. And I think this is John putting words in his mouth, saying, making his argument that you can't trust any other religious teaching unless they teach through the gnosis of Jesus and the gnosis teachings of Jesus. Um,
Yeah, something I wrote in my blog this week is that every faith tradition that's out there has teachings within that faith tradition that are life giving and things that are death dealing. And and that includes Christianity.
Right.
Christianity has some things that it's complicated. It's not a package deal. You can't take it
No.
all total. You've got to weigh each element and ask, is this life giving or death dealing? But it makes more sense to me rather than saying Christianity is the only way or Jesus is the only way. The way that John characterizes
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'll circle back to that in just a second. But the way it's characterized here, it would make more sense to me um, to gather up that which to collect that which is life giving from a multitude of faith traditions. Just
Right.
to that be what you're looking for. Collect those. Don't be so passionate about making people Christian, like the whole package thing. No,
Right.
what is life giving about Christianity, or what is life giving? Let's circle back now. What is life giving about Jesus? What is it that makes
Right.
Jesus the way? Is Jesus
Right.
just intrinsically or is he arbitrarily the way? Or is he intrinsically the way because of the ethics and the values that
Mm-hmm.
he taught?
Mm-hmm.
Is the golden rule the way? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Is loving your neighbor the way? Is
That's right.
nonviolence the way? Is resource sharing and wealth redistribution, as we see in the synoptics, is that the way? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Right.
I can see those things being exclusive intrinsically, but to religiously arbitrarily say Jesus is the only path to knowledge, I just don't think that works in our cosmopolitan context today.
No, not for today. It certainly doesn't. I think, the other possibility that exists there is that, very healthy people who were in charge of putting John together, perhaps they were seeing in their midst a dominant philosophy of teaching taking place in their time and place, and may have said, this is so harmful. They may have said, this is such a harmful teaching, that to try to counteract that, he makes a more exclusivist, uh,
It just goes to
uh,
the opposite
goes
extreme.
to the opposite because of what was dangerous. I think you and I, Herb, would have a struggle in our current state of today, finding a whole lot to celebrate about American evangelicalism
Yeah.
or Christian nationalism, that we would have a hard time finding uh, uh, good nuggets to pull out of those systems right now. And so we may push really hard and say, no, the Jesus that needs to be followed today is the Jesus of justice and inclusion.
Mhm.
A more, a more woke Jesus who's concerned about what's happening to the marginalized, and we don't see that in evangelicalism. So we might almost say, you and I, that much of evangelicalism and certainly all of Christian nationalism needs to be rejected.
Mhm.
That we would
Mhm.
be strong. I mean, I think we would say we would be stronger like that, and perhaps John in this context is being strong because he
Doing
saw
something
something
similar.
similar.
Yeah. Yeah. Doing something similar. Yeah. It's hard to know how to interpret this in a life giving way completely, being so far removed with what it was, like you
Right.
said, that the authors are really responding to.
Yeah.
What are they saying there? So the second theme that jumps out to me in this week's reading is there is a lot of gendering of God in this
Mm-hmm.
passage. I mean, there's this language that don't you believe that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, male Jesus. And the words that I say to you, I don't speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me, doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. And he just goes on, me and the Father, Father, me. And anybody who's seen me has seen the Father, and how can you say, show us the Father, and all of this language of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Jesus and God as as Father. Um,
In one sense, that there's the it's somewhat revolutionary in some way just to hear Jesus reference to God in a more familial way. That's relatively new from my understanding to the way that God is referred to. God is referred to in a more higher, transcendent understanding prior to Jesus coming in, and we see in Jesus a little more of that familial sense. So, in one sense, you do see um, a new teaching in the sense of this familial, but at the same time, it's reinforcing, as you're saying, in a very strong way, very much the patriarchy and male understanding of God.
Two things jump out to me there. First of all, the romanticized version of the family with a lovey-dovey dad is a rather new thing for us today.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the Johannine community's time, the family unit itself, I mean, children were less than slaves. They were treated like dirt.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder how much of that child parent relationship we have superimposed on this passage.
Mm-hmm.
I know that in the synoptics, John Dominic Crossan, in his book The Greatest Prayer, talking about the Lord's Prayer, especially which is our Father who art in heaven, he has a really great section in that book on showing how within patriarchal societies, um, the father was the one who, it was economic, it was political, it was about
Mm-hmm.
resources,
Mm-hmm.
that the father was the one responsible to make sure everybody had what they needed to thrive and nobody had too much while others didn't have enough. And I like that
Mm-hmm.
aspect of Jesus
Mm-hmm.
referring to the Father. Again, I think we find it more in the synoptics than we do in the Gospel of John.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's this cryptic kind of mystical connection between the Father and John here that we don't get in the synoptics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that it's that cryptic connection that I have the problem with. We don't do what we do with Jesus's maleness. We don't do that with his
Mm-hmm.
race or his ethnicity. We don't do that with his Jewishness, as an example. In other words, you can't require someone to be Jewish in order to be a Christian pastor, right? But how many
Right.
faith
Right.
traditions require Christian
Yeah.
pastors to be male
Right.
because Jesus was male and God is
Mm-hmm.
male? According to this passage, God is
Mm-hmm.
male. Those types of things.
Yeah.
So I've got three statements from Elizabeth Johnson that I want to spend some time with this evening, if that's all right.
Of course.
Just let's bring those up and hash some of those around for a minute. See if my computer will work. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I love the way Zoom works. I can never tell what exactly it is
I
everyone
know.
else is
It's
seeing once we
frustrating.
do this. So, but this is from Elizabeth Johnson. Actually, let's go to the first slide. This is from. Can I get to there? It is. What is the right way to speak about God? This is Elizabeth Johnson, She Who Is, The Mystery of God and Feminist Theological Discourse. And my copy is a Kindle copy, so Kindle location 807. What's the right way to speak about God? This is a question of unsurpassed importance. For speech to and about the mystery that surrounds human lives and the universe itself is a key activity of the community of faith. In that speech, the symbol of God functions as the primary symbol of the whole religious system, the ultimate point of reference for understanding experience, life, and the world. Hence, the way in which a faith community shapes language about God implicitly represents what it takes to be the highest good, the profoundest truth, the most appealing beauty. Such speaking, in turn, powerfully molds the corporate identity of the community and directs its practice. And she goes on, let's see if I can get to the next. There it is. The symbol of God functions. Upon examination, it becomes clear that this exclusive speech about God, and she's talking about exclusively gendering God as only male, serves in manifold ways to support an imaginative and structural world that excludes or subordinates women. Wittingly or not, it undermines women's human dignity as equally created in the image of God. Language about God, and this is the last statement, in female images not only challenges the literal mindedness that has clung to male images in inherited God talk, it not only questions their dominance in discourse about holy mystery, but insofar as the symbol gives rise to thought, such speech calls into question prevailing structures of patriarchy. It gives rise to a different vision of community, a community, one in which the last shall be first, the excluded shall be included, the mighty put down from their thrones, and the humble exalted. The words of Mary of Nazareth's song of praise, creating conditions for the formation of community characterized by relationships of mutuality, reciprocity, of love, and justice. So, what these three statements say to me, if I could just summarize them, is that however we talk about God, like in this passage, that's going to function, whether we wittingly or unwittingly, whether we're intentional or unintentional. All theology is political, it's economic, it's social. Theology always serves to either further oppress the oppressed, or it seeks to liberate and include and to lift up those whom the present system oppresses. There's no middle ground, one or the other. So the symbol of God here functions. It functions to shape and then to preserve. And if we exclusively define God as male, then uh, what happens is that women are then relegated, and we know this from church history. Women become relegated as somehow less than male.
Right.
I think of like the imagery of Jesus being the groom and the church being the bride, and the difference between the church and Jesus subconsciously gets translated to folks, subtly gets translated to folks, that's the difference between a woman and a man. And that stuff is horrible. But she flips the purpose, because again, how we talk about God functions. What if we gender God in ways that represent all genders, in a way that centers the marginalized, that calls attention to those who are being harmed, that values. Again, yeah, I love these statements from Elizabeth Johnson. It challenges me, and what they do is they challenge some of the most cherished Bible verses
Right.
that I have cherished throughout my
Right.
journey, like the one in Hebrews, that Jesus is the exact representation of God. Well, in what way? If you mean in love and in justice and his concern for the oppressed and marginalized, dead on. I'm right there with you. But if, and I'm not making this up, this passage is used by church hierarchy and ecclesiastical structures to prevent women from participating in ministry because they don't have the same anatomy that Jesus had. That Jesus is the exact represent. How does a male Jesus save women if that's how we're interpreting that?
Right. Right.
So,
This is, and I know from the women pastors in my life, the friends I have who are women pastors, they have told me the atrocious ways that they are treated. Pastors struggle, of course, in general, but any type of human business. Some of you who are watching this are pastors, you understand this. Sometimes you get treated pretty rough by your parishioners, by people who disagree with how you're trying to lead your congregation. uh, after talking to women pastors, I almost feel like I should never complain at all for any mistreatment I get compared to what they go through. I mean, a number of them have told me they have been threatened with death because they hold the office that is only supposed to be for male leadership. We have completely uh, made it so difficult because of this patriarchal uh, emphasis. I mean, not just emphasis, but law about who has the authority to teach and preach. It has literal life and death implications for how women are treated, uh, not just in the pastorate, but in their marriages, in the workplace, just down the line, everywhere. This God patriarchal language has reinforced the maltreatment of women.
And I want to encourage those that are listening that are maybe feeling the internal pushback to some of the things we're saying, that within our sacred text, especially the stories that we have in our sacred text about God, about sex, about gender, the scriptures are not monolithic on this subject. We not only have passages like what we're looking at this week, but we have other stories, and one of them that comes to mind is the our most ancient origin myth story, that speaks to us. In the beginning, in Genesis, God made, in Genesis 1:16, God makes two great lights, one to rule the day and one to rule the dark, one to rule the night, right? But we have times of day when both the sun and the moon are shining. Mm-hmm. We have times of day that are neither night nor day. They're kind of somewhere in between, whether you call it twilight or dusk or dawn. There's not always a clear delineation. And just a few passages later, just 10 verses later in verse 26, it gives this imagery of God making not just the two great lights of the night and the day, but you have then God making humanity in God's image, both male and female. And what that says to me, there's a way to look at that where it's a binary, you're either male or female. Or what he's setting up there is like he did with the two great lights, he's setting up a spectrum where, regardless of where you identify anywhere along that spectrum between those poles, it's the whole thing that is the image of God. So whether you're cis, whether you're trans, however you identify with gender, however you express yourself with gender, you're a human being. And so you fall somewhere on that spectrum of gender, and the whole thing illustrates the beautiful variety of what the image of God is. And so if nobody this week hears anything else any of us say this week, or me at least, I should say, if nobody hears anything else that I've said this week, whoever you are, cis, trans, doesn't matter in this context, whatever people are telling you, you are just as much an image of God bearer as anyone else. You are an image of the divine. It's that Jewish tradition that says before every person there walks an angel saying, behold the image of God. And if we would practice that, man, what a difference that would make.
Yeah. Just to hop on a couple of things that just to go along with what you're saying, the one that passage in the creation account where God says, let us make humanity in our image. God uses plural pronouns to reference,
I love that,
God's self.
I love that.
God is plural, and so God in and of themselves is a multifaceted being that cannot be represented by just one gender, but by a spectrum of gender. I think it's so important to see that. And then the other thing you see both in the Hebrew scriptures and in the Christian scriptures about the Spirit is referenced with feminine language. And both in the Ruach and in Sophia and Sophia for wisdom, but Why am I forgetting this? Pneuma for spirit in the New Testament, is that all in this feminine language, and I think it's been so helpful for me to really envision the spirit, even the spirit as having the feminine attributes and representation of God. But I think, and I think just in general, as we're thinking about how we can reimagine language about God, it's obviously much harder to reimagine. Though you can, but it's a little harder to reimagine Jesus as anything other than a man, because there's a literal male Jesus present there. But I've seen people who have talked about the feminine Jesus and highlighted the feminine attributes of Jesus. But I think wherever you can, uh, to really zero in on the feminine when you're talking about the spirit, and to even with God, that we've traditionally put the father language, to instead put the mother language. I know, Herb, you wanted to give a shout out to a book
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
that does that so well.
Yeah, I think we need ways of talking about God that, or the divine, ways that are large enough to embrace all gender identities and all gender expressions. That's what we're saying here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some among us that, now that there's this push for the divine to be imagined in a way that represents all genders, there's some that want to just jump immediately to that God is genderless, that God doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be careful there. We don't get to exclusively male gender God for 2 millennia and then just jump to no gender when we're faced with having to confront God as a different gender than just male.
Mm-hmm.
One of the books that's pushing back on this, and a dear friend of mine, Deneen Akers, she wrote this new children's book. You can find it at watchfiremedia.org, I believe. But if not, we'll put a link to it in this week's YouTube description. But it's a children's book, Dear Mama God, and it is beautiful, beautifully illustrated, just a beautiful book for kids. But I want to tell you my own experience. I spent a year in the discipline of when I would pray, no longer praying to Father God, but praying to Mother God. And listen, I was raised by a single mom who was a cosmetologist in the 80s. All right. I have spent countless hours sitting in an empty beauty salon chair, listening to my mother and another woman talk while she did her hair or something. Just whatever they do there. Just the conversations that I grew up hearing about the world through women's perspectives. All right. That's the context in which I say this. I still had deep roots of patriarchy and misogyny and less thanism that I didn't even know I had towards women. I thought I was an ally. I didn't even know I had those things in me until I spent those 12 months exclusively praying to Mother God.
Mm-hmm.
There was stuff that brought up that I had to deal with and grow through. And I can tell you too that women that have talked to me about this, when they pray to Mother God, there is something miraculous that just clicks. It just shifts. It's something that changes inside of them that is beautiful, and it's hard to put words around that as a man, but the way that they describe it, it just brings me to tears. It's beautiful what they
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so again, the closest we will ever come to God in this life is each other. And
Right.
how I relate to you, how you relate to me, that stuff matters. We are all image bearers, and we need, um, varied as the human race, we need ways of talking about God that are just as varied if humanity
Mm-hmm.
bears that divine image.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, I think this story this week gives us a lot to a lot of platform to have the conversation. Again, there's a lot of gendering and exclusively male gendering that happens in this passage.
Right. But that's the beauty of being able to continue to wrestle with the scriptures. You can not just learn the good that comes from it, but it can also challenge you to how you can ask you how you can do better. And we can do better as we read these passages. We can do better today. We can carry on the work of what the gospel writers were trying to do, but do it in a way that continues to honor the progressive
Mm-hmm.
trajectory that humanity has been on. We continue to evolve, we continue to develop, and that's honoring the scriptures in a very important way. Is that we continue the progress that each generation has tried to move forward on.
Yeah, and as androcentric or as male centered as this passage is, it does set us, it has the potential rather to set us on that very trajectory. Because if we define Jesus's representation of the divine, not in his maleness, but in his character, and the fact that the way that Jesus reached out to the oppressed, the way that Jesus liberated the oppressed, the
Mm.
way that Jesus saw every human being as a bearer of the image of God, and if something was doing harm to them, he sought to liberate, to heal, to bring life, to deliver. He did so personally, but he also did so systemically. With the flipping of the tables, that's one
Mm-hmm.
example of the systemic challenges he made to the system. So again, if that's what it means to represent God, then full circle, it's Jesus's fault that I have a problem with this passage, because I'm
Yeah,
concerned about the harm being done to women, like he was concerned for people who were being harmed.
that's right.
And this passage plays a part in that. So
That's right.
again, it's kind of like a loop. If you really take it to heart, Jesus is the one to blame as to why I think this passage could have been less gender problematic.
Yeah.
Gendering God can always be life giving, it can always be death dealing, and we have to be careful how we do it.
Yeah. Well, and this again, this last few verses of this passage that we read actually call us to this mission of continuing the work of Jesus, because it says here that, believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, and that uh, believe me that I will be in you as the Father and I are in one another, and you will do greater works than me. That Jesus says that you will actually do greater things than I did. You will carry the work forward. You will take it to the next level. So in this passage, you actually have Jesus laying out the right, the responsibility, the duty for those of us who follow in his name to
Mm-hmm.
do
Do the
even
works.
more.
Yeah.
So this effort of wanting to be concerned about gender inclusion and those who are differently sexually oriented, to include them, that work is part of Jesus' work. Even if Jesus didn't address it personally in his time, this is doing the work.
It's the trajectory of the way.
That There you go.
You
That
know, it's
is the
it's
way.
you
I'm supposed to echo you when you say that, right? It is the way.
only on the 4th of May. So no, listen, I have a friend who always brings the Lord's Prayer. Anytime I talk about Mother God, he always throws the Lord's Prayer in my face and says, Jesus prayed to God his Father, and that's good enough to me. You're bringing out a great point here that, listen, if we stay on the trajectory of the path that Jesus set us on, then we're going to do even greater things than Jesus. And some of that is calling into question this exclusive male gendering of God.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love it. That's a great response to that.
Yeah.
It's building on the
Absolutely.
work of Jesus, not copying it.
That's right. This is let's Jesus did not set in just as we don't believe that the scriptures were set in stone on Mount Sinai with the 10 commandments, we don't believe that Jesus created rules set in stone that you don't waver from on any way, shape, or form. We believe these are gateways, these are portals, these are launching pads into more and more, better and better.
Yeah, they're the way of practicing love and inclusion and justice, and you have to take your context into account there, not just repeat the behavior, but
That's right.
extract the ethics and the values and say, how do I apply this in the most life-giving way in my context? And again, I mean, if we just looked at every person as a bearer of the image of the divine, I mean, how much would that enable us to do the very kind of work that we're talking about here?
Mm, mm.
I mean, we would
That
be,
takes us so far.
it would,
It's,
it would,
yeah.
it would. Well, check out Danine's book. Another, just a quick shout out. If Another great book that is a good resource for looking at the harm that exclusively gendering God as male has the harm that has been practiced within Christian history is the book by, and I got it right here. I give you the page numbers is what I'm looking for. It's Jacqueline Grant's book, classic book, White Women's Christ and Black Women's Jesus, Feminist Christology and Womanist Response. The section that you're looking for is the 20 pages from 151 to 172, right in that section. And also, since we're talking about books, you can
Hey,
find mine
yes,
at
sir.
renewedheartministries.com.
There you go. Well, that's good. Well, thanks for this conversation, Herb. As always, I see God in you, and that's the beauty of the image of God, is that I can see it in you, and recognize that God is still working and active in the world today, because He gives me hope. She gives me hope through you, and I'm very grateful for that. And so, tell us where we can find you, and
Sure. Also, I just want to say, and also with you, Todd. I feel like I've said that so many times today because it's May the 4th, and everybody in my circle of friends knows that I'm a Star Wars fan, like the original trilogy fan. And they keep saying, Happy Star Wars Day, Herb, or May the
yep.
4th be with you, Herb. And I feel like an Episcopalian at Easter because if I wish I had a nickel for every time today I've said, and also with you. I mean, so anyway, you can find me at renewedheartministries.com. I'm also on all the social media platforms, so you can find me there too. But primarily renewedheartministries.com. Todd, where can they find you?
Well, I have to say that I have not seen Star Wars. I do not intend to see Star Wars. And May 4th is the day of my youngest daughter Emma's birthday. And so that's what May 4th is about. And screw the rest of y'all who think anything differently. But you can find me at toddjleonard.com or at my church, Glendale City Church.org. Really glad to have you guys with us this week.
Tell your daughter I said happy birthday, Todd, and may the 4th be with you.
Thanks a lot. And we will see you guys next week.
Thanks, everyone.